Apart from the Russia-Ukraine crisis, there's another crisis brewing in the world. According to the latest and the 6th Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's IPCC assessment report, things are getting a lot worse with increases in extreme high temperatures on land and the sea, torrential rains, droughts and weather changes. Now, it's a well-known fact, isn't it, that buildings and homes we live in and work in not only draw on Earth's precious resources, they also add substantially to carbon emissions, which are in turn raising the Earth's temperature. Today on the Property Show, we put the spotlight on India's green built footprint to ask, are we moving fast enough and doing what it takes? Joining me is Anshuman Magazine, Chairman, India, Southeast Asia, Africa and Middle East, CBRE. Now, CBRE has come out with its first ESG report breaking down the progress on India's green office buildings. So, it's critical to note that it's office buildings. We also have with us Aditya Virwani, Chief Operating Officer of the Embassy Group. Now, as a young leader of one of India's largest real estate companies, I'm sure that mitigating climate change is high on his personal and professional priorities. With us is Dikshu Kukreja, Managing Principal Architect of CP Kukreja and Associates. We all know architects are a critical stakeholder in how responsibly we build and grow. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Anshuman, I read the report released recently, and it shows pretty strong statistics when it comes to just the office building footprint. So, the report, just to cite this number, it says office green certified stock grew by 177% in the past 5 years, and we are now at about 212 million square feet. That's December 2021. You believe this is an achievement worth celebrating?
To some extent, yes, because to be honest, even I was surprised, because normally you think that the whole green movement is not being really taken up. And like you mentioned in our report, when we did the survey, 31% of all office buildings in the major cities in India are LEED certified. So that way, it was, definitely better than expected. However, no doubt a lot more has to be done. Just few other takeaways from the report. We also found out that buildings which are so-called green buildings, they trade at lower vacancy, which means that, especially in the background of what is happening since last couple of years on COVID, the vacancy rates are lower. Number three, NCR, Bangalore and Hyderabad in particular, 65% of all new leasing which happened last year in these three cities were in green certified buildings. Also, the rentals in these buildings are slightly higher than what you would get in a non-green building. And interestingly, we did a survey in Asia Pac on what was called investor intention. So CBRE Asia Pac, we did a survey, and it said that what we found out was 80% of investors, ESG was in their investing strategy. And lastly, I think one interesting fact was that post-COVID, one of the big challenge all corporations are going to face across the world, including India, would be to retain and attract talent. And our survey shows that most employees want to work out of so-called green buildings.
Anshuman, I think you've recaptured the most salient points of the report. So, Aditya, after hearing Anshuman, I think we can say there's no taking away from the progress on green buildings, especially on the commercial side. We do also rank amongst the world's top 5 countries on that front. But I'm sure you feel that there is an urgency to accelerate this movement much more. Now, what are you doing as a group to mitigate carbon footprint?
Well, I think it's interesting what Anshuman just said, and I'll substantiate some of those facts. He mentioned that 30% of our India portfolio is LEED certified, and our portfolio as Embassy is over 75. And what that trend shows is that even in the 700 odd million square foot of grade A space, the top of that, the top developers in that space are already advanced in there. And us will push other people to go towards that so they can also reach places where they can generate higher rent and vacancies can improve. Everything has to be incentive driven. Unfortunately, that's the way the world works. So I believe that us going ahead will also encourage the developers behind. Now, what have we done and what can we do better? I think energy has been one of the key things that we focused on. We have a solar park that's part of our REIT. We're in the process of also putting rooftop solars all across and also having this as a base spec now going forward. Now, that itself offsets 100,000 tons of CO2. That is equivalent to many small towns across the world. We've also done something with the green financing, which is pretty interesting. This is, again, incentivizing people to get cheaper financing for their projects. We've done something with waste, which I think is incredible. We've done an end-to-end waste management system where we go to villages close to our parks and we actually educate people on how to segregate waste and set up these self-sustaining facilities that is self-sustaining. And the idea is channeling money into the right CSR foundations. So those are some of the interesting things we've done, but there's a long way to go. Certifying materials is something that is not really touched upon in India yet. Making sure that that's passed down the ladder from up to down. So yes, we're being pushed from investors, from tenants, but we now need to push our vendors. We need to push our contractors and people we buy supplying materials for to also reach that place. And I think one place where we can also look at is carbon offsets.
That's a little bit of a complicated topic, but we will come to those just in a while if we have the time. Dikshu, I'd like you've heard the IPC, you've heard one of India's largest developers. What's your own sense? I mean, what I hear is that yes, there's a lot which is happening on operational efficiencies, but there is so much missing when it comes to use of materials, how it's transported, and what we are doing with construction and demolition waste. A lot of these aspects are not even touched upon or spoken about much. Am I right or am I wrong?
No, I think you're absolutely right, Manisha, and I feel it's a very important subject you are talking about, and it's very critical. What you started by saying, the state of our world, the way global climate change is affecting us, I think it's literally, no pun intended, but tip of the iceberg, where we are waiting for calamities to happen before our eyes, and what we are going to leave for future generations, I really don't know. It's a sad state of affairs, and where I see things need to improve is not just what is being done at the moment. I think is just not enough at all. I think we need a three-pronged approach. The first is at the policy level. If we are looking at creating environment-friendly, sustainably designed buildings, then I think our policies need to get friendlier. For example, right now, we are still in the government side looking at things in silos. You need to start a project, you need to get permission for tree cutting. First of all, one should minimize tree cutting, but that's happening separate, environmental approval is separate, and so the list goes on. So the silos are still existing. The overall policy towards encouraging green buildings is not good enough yet. The second aspect I feel where the approach requires is people like us who are discussing in the panel today, the professionals need to still come up there. Our knowledge, awareness needs to be enhanced. That's not yet fully there, I would say, in the professional communities. Our understanding of how we can adapt better technologies, construction materials, designs, that is still, I think, a long way to go. And I'm sorry if I'm sounding pessimistic, but I am very concerned at the current state of affairs. And the third is just simply consumer awareness. Through this show, you're bringing out an important aspect, but we need many more such shows for people to understand how, as an individual, they can play a role. So whether it's a community coming together and building a rainwater harvesting tank under their playfield or playground, which is neighborhood park there, or it is even understanding what solid waste management is, how garbage has to be separated out. You can put those colorful buckets or bins out there, but do people know even how to use them? I see that at airports and other public places, the awareness is still lacking. So I think really we have a long way to go, and we need to really quickly speed up this whole process.
All three, and I think you've captured it very well in just three buckets of how we need to approach this. Coming back to just the office building stock that we have. I mean, I know 30% is not a bad number, Anshuman, but I also looked at another number from your report, and it said the listed REIT portfolio is just above 35% of the entire portfolio is actually green certified, which was a little bit shocking to me, because I would think that these are from three largest developers. Aditya is saying that at least Embassy has 70% plus green certified, so I don't know where the numbers are missing. According to you, what is the bottleneck on faster adoption? I mean, how can we take this number very quickly up to 50, 60, 70%, at least in the commercial and office space?
Number one, it has to be demand-led. So all the big corporations, be it Indian or multinational corporations who talk about that they believe in ESG, have to put in their money where the mouth is, to put it very simply. If the occupiers say that, look, they would only go into a building which is green certified, people who are developing would have no choice. I think that is the needle mover. Then same with investors.
Anshuman, I'm sorry to come in here, but aren't occupiers demanding it? I mean, we're talking about these being Fortune 500 companies, and companies like Accenture and Microsoft and the occupiers, whether it's IKEA, they're all making mega promises globally to go get to net zero. So they should actually be more worried than even the developers who are giving them the buildings.
Of course, but there's also one other aspect that you should, when I said put the money where the mouth is, really I meant is that are the occupiers willing to pay a bit of a premium for a green building, because it does cost money to, for example, to have a platinum rated office building, right? So that, I think that will move the needle, and that is happening. I'm not saying it's not happening, but that pace has to fasten, where they would say, look, we will pay that premium. And it's not easy, because for a lot of the companies also, they are competing in the marketplace to win those contracts. And in India, large part of the business process outsourcing, call centers, is back-end work. And there are third-party vendors who are working on it. And they are competing in the marketplace literally per seat basis. So it does become, it's not that simple, it does become difficult to win that business at a competitive cost, and then also pay a premium for many other costs, be it people, occupancy. But the good news is that it is happening. But that will, to answer your question, this is where it will improve. The second is, of course, the investors, the large investors, are already demanding that they would put in, like some of the stats I mentioned, that the green buildings have a lower vacancy rate, they're getting a bit of a premium on rental, etc. All this will drive the investors also to invest. And then, of course, the developers have to play a major role. And thanks to, you mentioned REIT and other investors coming, especially in the commercial space. As you know, today, India's largest office landlords are international private equity funds, which I could never imagine would happen in my lifetime. I think all this will, we do expect that to improve the pace of change.
All right. Aditya, what would you have to add on the top of what Anshuman has said from a developer perspective? I mean, what can you do? Forget about the demand. I mean, as a responsible company, I know a lot is already happening in Embassy, including waste and water management and energy. And I think you're probably the only developer which has a 100 megawatt captive solar plant, which is meeting 30% of your portfolio needs, which is huge. But I'm sure you're constantly thinking of doing better, especially on the materials front and the process of construction and design.
Well, what I can say is I can confirm what Anshuman is saying, that push that's coming from investors and tenants is here. And you're going to see this accelerated change in certified green buildings. I actually think that 200 number out of the total stock of 700 is extremely low. It's going to be interesting to see that number in the next 3 years. I think you're going to see a massive growth. So that push is there. Our base costs have gone up, and unfortunately, as developers, we can't justify the rents going up. But this is a norm, and this is our responsibility as a corporate to do these kind of things. Now, yes, base costs have gone up, and tenants are asking for this. I think that the ways that you can improve, and I was trying to touch on it earlier, is going and seeing how can you go one leg down, one derivative down, and now even work with your vendors and work that certified materials are reaching that point. I actually think that we do a really good job. We just need to certify and document because India is up there with top 5. I read this in your article, Manisha, that actually we're top 4 in the world, ahead, behind countries like Canada and the US, which is really impressive. So we do a good job. There definitely is room for improvement. And I personally think that certified materials is one of those, along with policy moves that can help other segments like residential and other asset classes.
All right, so we will talk about residential, but at this point, I'm going to thank Anshuman Magazine. Thank you, Anshuman, for highlighting all the salient points of the report and taking us through your views. And Aditya and Dikshu, stay with us, because as we spoke about and Aditya mentioned that we might be top 5 when it comes to green building footprint. But if you add up all of India's green certified buildings, it's just a little over 5% of our total built environment. And that's also because commercial and office makes up for only 25% of India's real estate. 75% is residential. Now, how do we bring sustainability into residences and homes at par with commercial is my next segment. Stay with us. Well, there's no business which does not consume the Earth's finite resources and emits harmful green carbon emissions. Now, the latest IPCC report warns of where we are headed with climate change and the critical need for action. So here we are figuring out how can we make India's built environment more sustainable. After all, buildings are responsible for almost 40% of global energy-related carbon emissions. Dikshu, I'm going to just move squarely to residential, right? The challenge there is so much more: independent homes, high rises. I just don't see that enough. I mean, I know we've done office, but I see so much consciousness on commercial, in malls, in offices, but really very little on the residential side.
Absolutely, Manisha. And it's ironic because I feel when you look at it from the point of view of energy consumption, or for example, water consumption, even power consumption, I would say, residential communities, residential buildings take up a lot of that. And we tend to focus only on office buildings and metropolitan cities, grade A buildings. But I think the focus needs to move towards residential. And again, I'm going to, at the cost of repetition here, say that this has to come up from multiple people. There are more optics in this whole scenario than reality. And I think for that...
So Dikshu, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just to ask you this question, on the residential side, you spoke about policy, but here, do you believe the state government's incentives, tax breaks will probably have the largest role to play in taking residential to be more sustainable and green?
See, residential sector of the real estate is always more price sensitive than the office space, because people are putting in their hard-earned life savings to buy a dream home, and they all work within very tight budgets. So I think this is the place where the state governments, if they come forward and they can incentivize more for projects which are most sustainably designed, it's going to help the developers to be able to produce that kind of a product which the end user can embrace. So I think in this case, more than anywhere else, the state governments and policies which are more friendly towards creating sustainable designs, environment-friendly designs, green buildings, is going to really help the whole cause.
Aditya, within the embassy group, you're doing both residential, commercial, hotels, the portfolio is large. Is the focus on building sustainably the same and equal on both fronts? Or is there a difference?
100%. And the problem you have with residential is ownership, right? Is here we own the assets on the commercial side, but when you hand over, it's handed over to a homeowner association, and they're not incentivized to do anything. So I can proudly say that Embassy, as all our luxury portfolio is IBGC, gold or platinum LEED. But now if you have to focus on the mid segment, we will 100% make sure that our buildings are also meeting those criteria, because any new supply, yes, we incentivize from the client side, on the tenants, on the higher rents or just the vacancy, but on the residential side, you are going to see that push from consumers who are into this and who believe that we need to change. And hopefully policymakers can incentivize this as well for developers, like Kerala has done with the 5% tax cut. but also we need to figure out a way, how do we solve the old buildings? How do we incentivize these associations?
Retrofitting, yes.
Great, exactly. That is, to me, the biggest challenge. You look around, you have so many buildings, 75% plus are residential, all historical buildings. I'm not concerned about the new supply, but how do we work with the policymakers to incentivize them? I think that's the key question we have to ask ourselves.
Dikshu, as an architect, is retrofitting for sustainability harder?
Well, it is definitely more complicated because sustainability is essentially a lot to do with energy, and energy means your electromechanical systems. So to retrofit in an existing structure or incorporate new technologies, new piping systems, etc., is obviously more complicated than doing it in green buildings. But I completely agree with Aditya that we cannot choose to ignore the existing stock of real estate, the mammoth amount of residential buildings out there. If they continue to be energy guzzlers, then somewhere we are losing the plot. So I agree with him completely that there needs to be a focus, and focus means also government policies incentivizing developers or homeowner associations to be able to go back and retrofit those buildings to make them more environmental.
And absolutely, Kerala has just given a 5% property tax rebate to new buildings. Can you imagine if every state said that let's give you a tax break if you actually retrofitted your older buildings and older homes with more energy efficient electricity or power lines and connections and design? It would just probably change a lot of the existing footprint that we have in built environment. But thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. It's a very large conversation, and the reason we do it is to constantly bring it to focus and tell people that please get into it more seriously. And if you're living in an older building, then please look at how you can retrofit. If you're moving into a new one, demand a green, sustainable building. Thank you so much. Well, we definitely need to start running on green and responsible buildings, not just trot, if we have any hope of keeping global warming to not more than 1.5 degrees of pre-industrial levels. Goodbye, and thanks so much for watching.